Hi Louise, it's really good to have you here to chat with us today. So I just wondered if you could just introduce yourself to our supporters, just to explain a bit about your background and how you came to write the book.
Yes, my name is Louise Perry. I'm a columnist of the New Statesman. I'm the press officer at We Can't Consent to This campaign, which I might explain a little bit more about later if it comes up.
Yeah.
And I am the author of The Case Against the Sex Revolution, a new guide to sex in the 21st century, which was published on the 3rd of June. So just less than a week ago as we're speaking now.
Yeah.
And yeah, so how I came to write the book. I mean, my background is in the women's sector. So I did I studied anthropology and women's studies at university, and then my first job when I got out of uni was working at a rape crisis centre. And then from there, I went into journalism, always with a focus on violence against women and generally issues to do with women and families. And that was how I came to work for We Can't Consent to This as well, which is a violence against women focused campaign. And yeah, so the in a way, I've been writing The Case Against Sexual Revolution in my head for about a decade. Even if I actually only sat down and put pen to paper about 2 years ago now. Because I've sort of been through so it's such a long time in feminist activism, and I have personally sort of been through several intellectual developments in that sense, you know, starting off from more of a liberal perspective and then more radical feminist perspective, and now wherever I am now, I don't know if it has a name, my unusual combination of feminist beliefs, and the feeling that I've come to, both from being involved in feminism but also being, you know, working on the ground with victims and, you know, seeing it through crime reporting and all this kind of stuff, is that there is a serious problem. The idea, which is very common among progressives, that history has a shape, and that shape is always that things are always getting better, that we have this kind of linear track of progress, starting somewhere around the Enlightenment and really picking up pace in the 1960s and sort of expecting it to get ever better as long as we continue where we're at. I don't believe that. I don't think history does have a shape. I think that I mean, yes, you know, sometimes there are trends that you can identify and you can maybe quite reliably predict that they're going to continue. But not necessarily. I think actually history really should be understood as just a series of changes with complicated consequences, and the sexual revolution is one of them. The idea that women have kind of unambiguously benefited from the sexual revolution, which is a very strong popular narrative, I think is wrong. I think that women have benefited in some ways, and I don't think that we either could or should go back to the 1950s. That's the phrase that everyone loves. It's the phrase I hear all the time, go back to the 1950s, which forgets, of course, the 1950s was an unusual historical period, but anyway, I digress. I think that there have the key thing that happens in the 1960s, which I think is the crucial technology shock which defines the whole period, is the invention of the pill, and in particular unmarried women being having access to the pill towards the end of the 1960s. And that, I think, is what sets so much of this in motion, because we have had periods historically of having sort of more or less conservative, more or less liberal sexual cultures. It does tend to be a little bit of a roller coaster if you look at historical periods. You know, you have the Randy Georgians, and then you have the Victorians who are much more conservative and so forth. You know, you have the Roaring Twenties, blah blah. But I think that what's really unique about the 1960s, and the reason that it's stuck, is because we had, for the first time ever, the ability to put women's fertility on hold, which historically is just outlandish. 99% of human history, this is unthinkable. People have always, of course, had various forms of contraception, but not reliable ones, and not that kind of invisible method that women can control themselves, which is what hormonal birth control does. So, and I think that we're still seeing the consequences play out, and I think we still haven't really reckoned with them. And part of the reason for that is because of this false narrative of progress, which I think really obscures what's really going on. It becomes much more difficult to acknowledge the downsides as well as the upsides. So because what happens socially as soon as the pill is introduced is that you have all sorts of elaborate social norms that used to be in place to control childbearing effectively. I mean, they're often framed by feminists as in place to control female sexuality, and they do have that effect, but the purpose behind them has much more to do with, you know, the community having some say in what circumstances children come into the world and how those children are raised, you know, because if you look at the various elaborate social norms and legal norms and whatever that exist in all cultures, you know, in various forms, what they're really based around is trying to control the horniness of young people effectively, and trying to keep them separated, and also you know, determine who has children with who and at what time and in what circumstances and all this kind of stuff, right? That a lot of that just kind of falls away immediately as soon as the pill comes along. Like the shotgun marriage is dead by the end of the 1970s. Yeah. Because it just doesn't, there doesn't seem to be a purpose to it anymore. I mean, the kind of perverse thing about this is that the pill is a very effective method of contraception, but it's not quite as effective as people often think. It's like, with perfect use, it's very effective, but most people don't use it perfectly. And so it's more like 91% effective, which actually isn't that great. So which is why you have this sequence where you have the pill introduced and then you have the decriminalization of abortion not long afterwards, because what happens with the pill is it's just effective enough to destroy various social norms around sex, but it's not actually effective enough to prevent unwanted childbearing. So you end up with a lot more extramarital sex going on, and therefore producing a lot more unwanted pregnancies. And then, of course, abortion has to be introduced to kind of provide a backup option. And the, you know, I don't want to go back on any of those things. I think that it has to be possible for women to control their reproduction. I mean, on a personal level, I want to be able to control my reproduction, you know, within marriage or without it, you know, like it's that women used to spend their whole lives pregnant, you know, from teenage and or recovering from pregnancy or whatever, and then would, you know, die not long after menopause. Like it was such a physical burden on women, and I think that it's a real blessing that we're now able to control our reproductive lives as we can. But I think that the social consequences of it, there needs to sort of be a negotiation with those. Like that's the space where we actually can have where there can be policy making, where there can be public discussion, you know, because one of the consequences, for instance, which I know that you're really conscious of, and which I think is a really harmful consequence of sexual revolution, is it has become so much more socially acceptable for men not to take responsibility for their children. And I think that is because of this feeling now in the air that, like, well, women get to choose whether or not they get pregnant or whether or not they keep a pregnancy. Why then should the men in their lives have any particular responsibility to, you know, it's on you kind of thing. I've heard from lots of women, particularly actually since the book was published, even though it wasn't published very long ago, women who say exactly this, that they decided to keep a pregnancy when they became unexpectedly pregnant with a partner that they weren't married to, and he was just nowhere to be seen. And actually an amazing, I mean, it's supposed to be that the deadbeat dads pay child support. I looked into the figures when writing the book. It's astonishing how few do, how much child support goes unpaid and how little effort the government seems to put into pursuing it. So you basically end up with these, you know, no wonder single mothers are struggling as much as they are, you know, because
definitely. I've got a couple of friends actually at the moment going through exactly that, and who have been really shocked at the who assume, you know, a friend of mine assumes that her husband can't walk out on her with 4 children and leave her completely financially unsupported, but he has, and there seems to be no legal ramifications for that. She was astonished the fact that there is no sort of safety net sort of to say, oh no, you must come back and you must support your children, because it just doesn't exist. So I think you're right that it leaves women and mothers in particular in a very precarious situation.
Yeah. And we know that there are all sorts of ways in which outcomes for children with single mothers are worse on average, despite the most valiant efforts of single mothers. It is just very difficult because you have to do it all yourself. And there isn't necessarily that social support in place. There isn't the government support in place, except to the extent of sort of, you know, an occasional meager paycheck is basically all you can expect. So that is the sort of consequence which is so destructive to those women and those children, and it is a consequence of sexual revolution, and not one that I think anyone intended or even could have predicted. I mean, you'd think, wouldn't you, that you introducing means for women to control their fertility, that you'd see a drop in single motherhood, and you actually see the opposite, because like humans are complicated and culture is complicated, and like introducing something as historically unprecedented as the pill, of course, was going to have these kind of ramifications. And what I'm trying to do in the book is to explore them and to start a conversation about the good and the bad of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the really important thing, isn't it, at the moment? And it's very unpopular to have conversations around these concepts. It just seems to be incredibly unpopular to sort of raise your hand and say, actually, there is a problem here, that young women and girls are being missold this culture, this hookup culture, and that this is something that they should want. And I suppose to go one step further, then sort of saying, well, you know, it's fine for you to have sex with whoever you want, whenever you want, that it's up to you to decide when you're ready, and with whoever. It then sort of takes another step, doesn't it, into that sex work is work, and that is all very empowering, and that you're not a feminist if you don't think that. So it seems to be stepping against the grain to be able to say that. So I guess what feedback have you had? Because the book has been there's been a few reviews of it, hasn't there, in mainstream press? I mean, has it mainly been positive or negative, or a bit of both?
I think it's been about 80% positive.
Yeah. Oh, that's encouraging.
Yeah, and about 20% like complete outrage.
Yeah.
Pearl clutching outrage. But that's actually better than I was expecting. I thought I might get more pushback than I have. Like that could change. It's not been out for long. But yeah, I mean, I've had positive reviews in lots of places. I mean, what I've been quite struck by in reviews and general feedback from readers and so on at this early stage is that there's an age thing. So younger women and men to some extent as well, to the extent that they're engaging, it's mostly women, are more skeptical of my thesis. And older, middle-aged and older women, particularly who've got children themselves, are much more receptive to it. And I don't think that's a generation gap. I don't think that's because boomers are more conservative than millennials or whatever. I think it's actually a life cycle gap. I think it's that because many of the older women who've written about the book or spoken to me about it have often said that they would have disagreed with me 20 years ago. That they went on a journey ideologically, largely as a result of their own personal experiences or seeing the personal experiences of people in their lives, and then have reached the same conclusion. And I'm really glad to see it written down.
Yeah. Well, we're really glad to see it written down, and when I shared some excerpts at our recent conference, we got a lot of applause, particularly when when you're talking about it was the bit that amuses at the back when you're talking about the concept of I think it was people having a contract to actually have sex, and you'd written about saying actually maybe we could call this marriage, you know. So it's like it's as if they're inventing something new, but actually this has been around for centuries. So and the fact that the evidence shows that you outline in the book that the best outcome for raising, you know, families and healthy children and for society as well is to get married and to stay married. I mean, obviously, you know, you're not condoning, and neither would we condone staying in a marriage where you're deeply unhappy and there's abuse, but actually staying married in this day and age is actually quite a bold move, really, because it seems, especially with the no fault divorce law that's just come through, that it's nobody's fault, doesn't matter, you know, just move on. I mean, certainly my friend who I just mentioned she feels completely gaslit by the fact that he could say, well, it's no one's fault, because she's saying, well, you know, I've been abandoned and I don't want it to go down as that.
I just want to, I mean, several reasons to object to no fault divorce, but that is absolutely one of them. If you're the wrong party, I think it's horrendous to be strong-armed into saying that no one's at fault. And actually it's my understanding of data in America, where there's different laws in different states, so you can have quite a good sets of data for comparison, is that no fault divorce tends to be bad for women financially, because it's harder to hold. Women can get a better deal if they hold out and push for making it clear that the partner was at fault, the husband was at fault. Whereas if it can be sort of resolved swiftly, women tend to be shortchanged, is my understanding of it. So there's financial ramifications, social ramifications. The other interesting data shows that no fault divorce tends to reduce commitment to relationships in general. So when in states that introduced it, you saw a drop in things like spouses supporting their spouse through further education or retraining, people having fewer children, all the sorts of things that you do that are about investing in a relationship long term and knowing that you're in it, you know, you're in it forever. People stop doing that, or are less likely to do that, because the whole institution becomes less stable, and the idea that you're doing this really means anything, that this really is permanent, ebbs away, even for people who do stick with it. So a really key argument that I'm trying to push in the book is that you can't just understand this stuff on an individual level. You can't just say whatever, people make their choices. I think that kind of almost libertarian approach just does not work when we're thinking about human beings who exist in networks of relationships and existing cultures, and you know, we are like so completely enmeshed with one another in every possible way. All of our choices are made within that context, and so to say to only look at it on that individual level is to completely ignore every other influence on how people behave and what choices people actually have available to them realistically. And something like no fault divorce is a good example of that. I mean, it's you can imagine situations in which like some particular like perfect example would benefit from no fault divorce or whatever you want to think of, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about applying a legal change or a social change or whatever to absolutely everyone.
Yeah, I guess that's the big thing, isn't it? That you're largely arguing in the book, that actually the concept of the pill, women being able to control their fertility, and the concept of legal abortion, I guess, have been brought about in the first place with the best intentions of solving problems with a small number of problems I get when it's really appropriate, but then the fact that it's created this whole societal change, and it's just changed the way that we think about this, and that actually it just seems to be a cure-all for everything, but it's then been so abused, and we've just seen in the news recently, I guess it's been going on for ages, the fact that so many social workers and doctors and police have been turning a blind eye to like the child grooming scandals in town all over the country, because so many of these girls have just been put on the pill or given abortions and no questions asked, and there's been no parental consent. I mean, we've seen recently there's been girls as young as 12 just been put on the pill with the parents not knowing, and this is how these abusers get away with it for so long. And then we've just seen in the news as well the fact that so many police forces, including South Yorkshire, which has obviously been one of the main ones with the Rotherham abuse scandal, that have been not even prosecuting crimes. They've just been using this this law where as long as the person that's committed the offence apologises to the victim, that they won't prosecute them. And I think I saw the headline today, which saying that 78 cases of sex crime in South Yorkshire Police have just not been dealt with because they've used this reconciliation method of the abuser has to say sorry, and they don't get no criminal record. It's just astonishing that sort of it seems to become in society, just seems to go this way, just to close their eyes to the fact that these things allow abusers to get away with it, which is shocking. I suppose the next question is having raised you've raised these issues, and I think that the vast majority of our supporters would agree with you on the things you've outlined in the book. Is where do we go from here? Because we've come so far in this direction of promoting this culture of that marriage doesn't matter, casual sex doesn't matter, you don't have to have commitment, anybody can be with whoever they like and raise their children however they like, and it doesn't matter. But yet all the evidence shows that it does matter. It matters a great deal for the well-being of everybody, really. How do we dial back from that? Well, I guess as you said, we don't want to go back to the 1950s. How do we go forward? How do we go forward to encourage marriage and to say to young women, actually, this is not benefiting you. This culture is not benefiting you whatsoever, and to move forward to a model of where marriage is important again.
Yeah. So what I decided to do in the book is I ended up including in the book like specific data-derived pieces of advice for readers, particularly directed at young female readers, but everyone to some extent, because there are, all of our choices are within a context, but we do still have them. There is still space to choose differently, and I think that and there is a kind of accumulating effect there. The more people do that, the more socially acceptable it becomes. And I think that there does seem to be a bit of a culture shift going on with Gen Z to some extent, in that there's more skepticism about things like sex positive feminism and hookup culture and the sort of sex workers work mantra and so on. And I think that I think that we've probably reached the high watermark of some of that kind of ideological stuff. I think, for instance, that one of the things that leads young women to make sexual decisions that aren't actually in their best interests is because of ignorance about the differences between female and male sexuality, which do exist on average in quite a profound way. And that's something I write about quite a lot in the book. And I think that if young women were not kind of lied to, frankly, by media outlets and by sort of other feminist voices and so on about that reality, and about actually quite how dark male sexuality can be sometimes in some men. Like, we were just speaking about Rotherham, like it is it is really grim, you know, sometimes. And I think that a lot of young women just don't know that because no one's ever told them. And one of the things that I get quite angry about is that there's a view among some feminists that you mustn't ever talk about like what girls can do to protect themselves, because if you do that, then you seem to be implicitly saying that they are responsible when it goes wrong, and when they're victim, and when they you know, when they're victimized, that you are implicitly victim blaming. And I just think what I find really frustrating about that is a lot of people who say that give their daughters that advice and give their friends that advice and take all of that advice themselves, but just don't say it publicly and reprimand anyone who does say it publicly. And I think actually, you know, not all girls do have, you know, attentive parents and friends and people in their lives who are going to look out for them, are going to tell them that sort of stuff. And I think actually it is incumbent on anyone who does have a public platform to say it and to be truthful about it, because, you know, you can't, there are all sorts of forms of violence against women and girls that are completely outside of victims' control. But also there are sometimes steps you can take. You know, you can be more suspicious, basically, of you can recognize red flags. You know, that there is a degree to which you can like practically empower girls, which I think we should be doing, and like a lot of good parents are doing. Sometimes parents feel underconfident about it because they don't want to be seen to be sort of strict or old-fashioned or any of these things. But I think actually it's hugely in girls' interests to tell them the truth. So there's that. I think that on a policy level, there are a lot of things that we could do to be doing things like encouraging marriage and making it easier for people to form families and so on. I don't know how long you've got.
Yeah, we've got 8 minutes left on this.
Well, I'm not sure if I can run through my entire policy platform.
Well, maybe we'll have to have another interview.
Yeah, none of which is
it's
really in the book.
Yeah, it's not really encouraged in RSE lessons either. This is something that we talked about at the conference, because we had a big focus on relationship and sex education, and it's quite shocking what you see and what parents tell us is happening in schools. And it doesn't seem to be, and certainly my youngest has just gone through a big talk at school. She's in year 6, and there's no mention of marriage. It's just sort of saying it's up to the child about deciding, you know, whoever and whenever they're going to have sex with someone. And it's not, I think putting that decision onto the child without any context is just puts too much pressure on them, really. And so we really feel that we need to be promoting marriage as a really good thing, and all the benefits of marriage that go there for, you know, especially for girls, because I suppose a lot of feminist argument has been that marriage is a patriarchal thing and it's not good for women. But, you know, in your book you outline all of the evidence of why it is. So it would be really good to see that going mainstream again, I think, from our perspective.
Yeah, I think that you can see the reasoning behind the really non-judgmental approach to things like RSE, but I just think they're children. Like I mean, we recognize this in law in terms of things like the age of consent, but you know, I think that it is the responsibility of adults and of wider culture to not just sort of let children loose in a actually really, really dangerous and in many ways dysfunctional sexual culture and hope for the best, and sort of expect them to just learn it on themselves, all by themselves, because, you know, like I have seen personally in my work, like how much sexual violence can destroy someone. You know, it's not something that you just have to go through as a rite of passage. You see what I mean? The sort of things that girls are, if you view it in this way, as just kind of leaving it up to the teenager or the young adult to kind of to shop around and decide what's, you know, things like encouraging teenagers to experiment with BDSM. Things like, you know, considering it normal for teenage girls or students to like go home with men that they don't know, like this sort of thing. Like oftentimes it will work out fine, and maybe it will just work out as a funny story or as a learning experience. Like if you're lucky, that's what it will be. But it also might actually go catastrophically wrong. And I just think that not just being neutral, but like it's really encouraging young people to make really risky decisions is, I just think, grossly irresponsible.
Yeah, no, it's not great. And I suppose this interview coincides with the launch of Love Island again, which it's just the worst thing. The way that
everyone keeps asking me to write about it, but I've actually never watched Love Island, so I'm not qualified to write about
I've seen snippets of it, and it's just the way that it promotes promiscuity and that it's all about looks, all about image, and parading around in a bikini and all these like relationship swaps, and it's just the worst. The worst kind of example of modern entertainment and
don't they have
promotion.
Don't they have a terrible suicide rate among?
Yes,
Love
they do.
Island
I do.
contestants?
It's quite shocking that it's even on. But yeah, no, that definitely would be worth a whole nother book, I think. So anyway, talking of which, I don't know if it's going to be backwards on the screen. I'll just hold it up for anyone that's no, it's a bit blurred. Anyone that hasn't seen it, for our readers. So we definitely recommend everybody to read this. It's such a great read and a really easy read as well, and it's just so much common sense. It's really refreshing. So for anyone that hasn't seen it, it's the Case Against the Sexual Revolution: A New Guide to Sex in the 21st Century by Louise Perry. So do read it. And it's really great. Thank you for chatting to us, and
thank you so much.
Maybe we'll see you next year at the conference. It'd be great to have you along to speak. I think that we'd really like to hear you. So hopefully, well, I guess for our supporters, watch this space, and hopefully we'll be able to speak to you again.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.